Okay, we're live.
Hey, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Planning Policy Executive Advisory Panel. It's held virtually today on Monday, the 24th of January. And welcome to everybody. A particular welcome to Councillor Lee, who's standing in for Councillor Anslow, is it not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome, Councillor Lee, and I am also informed that Mr. Candler may be running a bit late. I understand the Chief Executive's holding an impromptu meeting, so he will be joining us, but perhaps a little bit later. So without further ado, can we move to the agenda? And item number 1, are there any apologies for non-attendance?
With apologies from Councillor Valerie Anslow, and Councillor Anne Lee is attending as substitute.
Thank you. Okay, brilliant. Agenda item number 2, members' declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, that didn't sound very loud, so that's good. I'd like to refer agenda item 3, colleagues, to the minutes of the meeting which was held on the 9th of December 2021. And may I sign these as a true record, or are there any comments from anybody about the accuracy of those minutes?
Quite happy with them.
Yeah, proposed acceptance.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you. And all those in favour? Are there any against? If so, please speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, lovely. Well, then I will virtually sign these minutes as a true record. Excellent. We will now move to the one of the more interesting items on the agenda, which is an update on the minerals and waste local plan. And colleagues who attended the last meeting will remember we had quite a discussion about this. So we're very much looking forward to getting into the discussion on minerals and waste. And Mark, I believe you're going to make a presentation to us.
Yes, Chair. It's a very quick presentation.
Welcome.
Yeah. Good morning. Yeah, I'm going to give a very short presentation and then basically open it up to a discussion and sort of questions and answers. So obviously there's a lot of questions that need to be asked, because we're moving from a current situation where we had a county-wide plan, and the big question is, do we retain a county-wide plan, or do we move into split north and west ones, and then other things flow from that. So I'll start with this very quick presentation, which is just basically the background. There is a requirement on all minerals and waste planning authorities, such as Northamptonshire Council, to review its adopted planning policies for minerals and waste. For minerals and waste, and that's for both the north and the west of the county, are in the minerals and waste local plan, Northamptonshire minerals and waste local plan. All plans have to be reviewed before they're 5 years old, and by review I don't mean a full updating. Then they need to be checked through to ensure that they're up to date, and if not, then there needs to be progress to update those policies that do need to be updated. The plan was adopted by the County Council back in July 20, being 5 years old, and where you then meet that sort of review, that review time scale. Next slide, please. Louise, can I have the next slide, please?
It's moved on my screen.
Although we've not done any. Oh yes, it's okay. It's fine now.
Yep. Mark, can you just hold it a
Although
second? Mark, hold it a
we've
second.
not undertaken.
Mark, hold it a second.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of echo on the line. I just wonder if colleagues, if everybody could mute their mics if they haven't. Apart from Mark, that might be helpful. But otherwise, I think everybody is muted apart from Mark. But Mark, you're having, if you can speak slowly and deliberately, because unfortunately there's a little bit of feedback.
Okey-doke. Yeah, will do. Although we haven't undertaken any detailed assessment of the policies to check whether they're up to date, you can get a good idea of where the issues might be, and that would mainly be around the provision figures, which are provision figures for the two main types of aggregate minerals that need to be extracted in the county, and that's crushed rock and sand and gravel. And the other area would be the capacity gap, what we still need to provide in terms of waste management facilities or disposal to meet the sort of demand within the county. We also think that, particularly for minerals extraction, there probably is a need for some new allocations. Some haven't come forward from the existing plan, but you do need to, I think, show some idea of what's going to come forward, so it gives an element of certainty to the minerals industry. Generally speaking, we think the strategy and development management policies would not really be seen to be out of date. I think they're reasonably robust, although there's going to have to be some tweaks because over time there's some sort of changes in government policy, and I think net zero and climate emergency needs to be factored in more into the plan than it was when it was prepared now over 5 years ago. And then there's some relatively minor updates to the NPPF, which would probably need to include, but that probably wouldn't be a great deal. Come next slide, please, Louise. So really the key issues for consideration are, in taking forward the minerals and waste policies, should it be on a Northamptonshire wide basis or split between North and West Northamptonshire? If there is to be a split, should those policies be taken forward in a specific minerals and waste local plan or included within a comprehensive local plan covering all policies? And should the policies be comprehensively updated, basically looking at everything from scratch, or only the policies considered to be out of date be updated? So they're the key issues, and I think the next thing now is to basically start to take questions and answers from people.
Chairman, you're muted.
Thank you, Councillor Jenny. And luckily, I was muted. When you said so, I said a rude word. But anyway, I am now back online. No, but thank you, Mark, for that presentation. And I think you highlighted the 3 issues that we need to discuss quite carefully. Naturally, whether to have 1 or 2 plans for the county of Northamptonshire, and to what extent the review of those plans shall be, whether it be a reviewing of the bits that we're not happy with, or a complete reappraisal from the ground up. So I have lots of hands flying up all over the place, and the first up is Councillor Deering, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wonder, as a new authority, I think it gives us a great opportunity to start afresh with everything. So I wonder if anybody could explain to me the benefits of actually staying with West Northants now.
Thank you. Mark, would you like to?
I think at the moment the key one would be it's a larger area, so it gives you more opportunity to move things around. You know, like to look at a greater scale of where new allocations could go and the like. But the key one is it's more cost effective than doing two separate plans, because we're quite a small team, so we'd have to sort of split ourselves and do both the plan for the north and the plan for the west. They're the main two. I think the other one that perhaps needs to be thought about is we're not really sure at the moment about what the government's going to do about changing the planning system. I know it's a bit in flux, and we don't therefore know about what they want to do in relation to the local plan system. So there could be some benefit in actually going ahead under the old system with a relatively straightforward county-wide review, with the thought that after that's adopted, then moving forward with a new plan for Northamptonshire under whatever new system the government brings in, and it will also have given us a few years of specific Northamptonshire data, because at the moment all of the data going back over the last sort of 20-25 years is all on a county-wide basis rather than by Northamptonshire.
Well, that's actually quite interesting, because obviously if you have the data split out for Northamptonshire, which is quite a large area after all, and not just the not homogenized into the whole county, it will give us some very interesting perspective. Okay, thank you, Mark. Councillor Deering, sorry, are you happy with that? Morning, George.
Yes, fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor North, please.
Thank you, Chairman. One's a question and one and then a comment on something. I think from my point of view, Chair, as you know, I wasn't on the county, so I didn't do waste and removals apart from when we consulted on it. I suppose from a simplistic point of view, I mean, and from as I understand, most of the sites, all but one, I think, are in this side of the county. And I suppose from my point of view, I suppose the question is, are we, supporting the West in relation to gravel extraction for house building and road building, and does it benefit everybody within the county? Or obviously does that extraction go all around the country? That's not something I'm up to speed on, Chair. But I mean, obviously there is an environmental impact if we obviously go long less distances in relation to the movement of this material, but I'm sure it probably doesn't work like that. So I suppose from my point of view, it's whether, is it being parochial? I mean, if it was Leicester, we'd be jumping up and down about it. So I suppose it is a question about how does it work and where does that those mills get dispersed to? I suppose is the question. I think the other point I want to make, Chair, is that in relation to updating, which was part of the choices, you and I know how long it takes to update the strategies, and I'm concerned that not that I disagree with Councillor Deering's comments, but I'm concerned if we start afresh and do a comprehensive reboot and spend the time redoing the strategy, you and I know it would take 2.5 years or so to get to that point, and then of course we'll be way beyond the requirement of the 5-year update. So I suppose from my point of view, it's about the timing of redoing rather than just actually updating where we are, and perhaps in my view, plan for a long review of updating the strategy, as we've got to do a new, as I would call it, a core spatial strategy, but obviously a new Part 1 plan for this side of the county. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And that's, of course, a valuable point, because with the Northamptonshire strategic plan beginning to be considered, obviously minerals and waste could feed into that, and that could be a saving of resource. I don't know what you might think about that, Mark. Mark, you're on mute. Or he's even frozen. No, it's not.
Yeah. Just trying to think what to say first. I think I'll start with a bit of a history about extraction in Northamptonshire, because the county was at one time one of the big suppliers of particularly of sand and gravel, and that really was the area to the east of Northampton. And I don't think it'd be underestimated how much was extracted during those years. I mean, a lot of which now are sort of European designation, because so much was extracted, and and the fact it went back to Walter. In about 20 years ago, the industry sort of tended to lose interest in Northamptonshire. I think it was the plum sites were sort of disappearing, and what you then got over a period of about 6-7 years was a situation where there was a relatively significant year-on-year decline for sand and gravel extraction. But interestingly, over that period of time, house building in Northamptonshire sort of was ramping up at that same time, and what that proves is that there's no direct correlation between house building and providing minerals. We were providing less minerals, but there was more house building. So that's something to sort of always bear in mind, that there's not that direct correlation. What you need to do in relation to providing for new minerals, new mineral extraction, is basically what the market can take, what has been happening in the area over the past 10 years. Has there been any more recent changes? So I think that the days of Northamptonshire and North Northamptonshire in particular, providing large-scale mineral extraction opportunities is now over, regardless of what sort of demand there is within the area. Now, within Northamptonshire as a whole, and in the days when there was a lot of extraction, it was very, very much what is now Northamptonshire that was providing that, because it was east of Northampton. There was not much elsewhere. So it's still the case that if you were to look at where the resources are, the stuff in the ground that hasn't yet been dug up, it is still the Nen, basically beyond Thrapston to Peterborough, where there are opportunities for extraction. There's less in the Nen the other side of Northampton, although we do have one site in the local plan there, which we're surprised hasn't come forward, but that's a decent site. There's some opportunities in the Great Ouse in West Northamptonshire, down just north of Milton Keynes, sort of Stony Stratford area, and beyond that, there's not a great deal of opportunities. The Welland is basically no good.
Mark, you were talking fine, you just went a bit quiet.
Yeah, my machine just sort of went duller for a second. The other area that we're not really certain about is the Tove Valley, which runs largely from Northampton Toaster down towards Milton Keynes. but that's split half between West Northamptonshire and Milton Keynes authorities, and there might be some particular issues there about whether the resources are good enough for the infrastructure that will be needed to extract from them. And really that then gets back to the debate about what are the opportunities in the NEN that, although we've had a lot extracted in the past and there is still resources there, the question is, are the minerals industry interested in it? Is it a case that what you can extract and the infrastructure that you'll need to extract from those sites enough for the industry, particularly the big players, to still have an interest? And I think that's one of the things that whichever way you do it, we'll need to have a call for sites very early on, just to see what the industry think of extracting from extracted in North or West Northamptonshire. So I think that's some of the things that need to be sort of borne in mind. I think there was a third point which I don't think I've answered. I've forgotten what that one was.
I'm not quite sure myself. You've certainly given us a very comprehensive answer, and it's interesting to reflect that as we are discussing minerals and waste, of course, a lot of the pressure will always be in North Northamptonshire, in the sense that the river's bigger as it flows down to the sea. And so the West will often have a rather narrower choice of river sites to extract from, although Mark, you've identified a site in the West which could be quite valuable. Anyway, hands are still flying up. Councillor Jenny, please.
Thanks, David. I can fill in some of the gaps here because my firm worked very closely for Hanson for many years. I actually ran the scheme that opened up Fen Farm at Whittlesea, so I'm well used and understanding exactly what they're after. As the biggest player in the country at the moment, they're concentrating their efforts on the Whittlesea site. They have something like another 15 years supply at Fen Farm for aggregates and another 4 or 5 years for sand. So basically what's happening at the moment is that they are concentrating block making plants on where there is sand locally, and mud brick plants we built them one at Measham, which does 300 million bricks a year. They have plans for another one to go in just southwest of Leeds, and another one in Cardiff. So anybody that's dealing with extract in this area is likely to be the smaller players, the Mick Georges of this world, and that sort of thing. Now, as far as do we want to do our own, or do we want to do a North one? I think Stephen will support me with this. Whenever we've talked about doing things in shadow, the attitude from the West has always been, we want our own plan. And therefore, if the West decide they want their own plan, it's no good us saying, well, we want to do one for both. And quite frankly, sort of looking at the transformation issues for this council, I would totally wish to see our own plan. It would certainly support our climate change agenda, because we won't be shoving materials around on roads. Most aggregate these days, if it's going to be moved a distance, tends to go by railway. If we were trying to send aggregates to West Northamptonshire, it would have to go by road. So that is a big no-no as far as I'm concerned. And I think I'll come on to this a bit later on, but we also need to look at our waste situation. But I think if we're just dealing with minerals for the time being, I'll come back on waste later on, if that's all right, Chairman.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. I think you make. Sorry.
I think that's about where we need to be at the moment. Our own plan.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, and I think you make some valuable points as well. And clearly, you've got a lot of knowledge, at least in the minerals, if not necessarily the waste side of things. And we'll get back to the waste later. So I appreciate your input. Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair. Right, I was looking forward to a longer update, really, from Mr. Chant this morning, because he seems to repeat the questions that are listed in the minutes. I think it is necessary for us to have an update after 5 years, because most councillors who don't have a professional background in this are not really aware of this. And it is important that we receive sufficient information. I would even call for a briefing. I looked for our policy online. There is a 154-page policy from 2017. At the time, there was an inspector who commented on our policy, our draft policy, and who asked us to fulfill conditions. If we decide to stick with this policy, do we need or go with a new policy? I assume we need to submit it to an inspector again. And we do need to review this, especially as Mr. Chan said, because of climate change. What we do with our waste is important, and our minerals. So I would like an update, a proper update with where we are. The panel for climate change, growth, and the environment has also asked for figures on last week, for figures on how much of our waste is recycled, because we don't seem to get many figures on that. So it is of interest to all the councillors. So that's really my question. Where can we get those figures? And yes, please, can we have a proper update? Can we find out where we can get that information from? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor. And certainly we are with regard to the minerals aspect of this, we are having a discussion about the strategic way that we take the minerals and waste plan forward. And I'm talking minerals, and clearly there is a debate to be had as to whether we move forward with a revision of what we currently have, or a complete from the ground up reassessment of the whole situation. But of course that is quite resource intensive, and also, as Councillor North pointed out earlier, it's also quite time intensive. So we do need to make sure that we have our minerals plan weighed off as economically and however as efficiently as possible. And obviously you've heard Councillor Jenny discuss the merits of having a plan for North Northamptonshire rather than a plan for all of Northamptonshire. And of course the West's views will have to be taken into consideration. Regarding waste, of course, that's a very different matter, and we haven't had an awful lot of discussion on that to this point. I'm going to ask Councillor North to ask his questions. He's got his hand up, and then I might ask Mark to just touch on the waste side, because certainly we've been talking more about aggregates than waste up to this point. So Councillor North, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm still on minerals. Thank you for Mark, and it was a very interesting update from my point of view, anyway. And it clarified quite a bit in relation to my original questions. And I suppose from my point of view, it just I do wonder, and I do share Councillor Jenny's point that the West do seem to want to do their own thing. So a lot will obviously link into what they want to do as well. But I suppose the point I would, and you may have a view on this, Chair, is that looking at this, if this waste and mineral extraction is not confined to obviously Northamptonshire, picking up on what Councillor Jenny and Mike said, that we're supporting a wider context and there may be little interest. I just wondered, one, is there a legal requirement for each county to do a plan, Chair? Because from my point of view, this does sound a bit mute nowadays. If these minerals are being used all over the country, then maybe maybe a regional perspective might be more useful. And this is where I was kind of going with this, Chair. Not too left field. I just wondered with the ARC, because I don't think the ARC stuff's dead yet. I just wondered where there's an opportunity to, from an environmental point of view, of pooling these kind of plans. I'm trying not to go too left field, but I mean, at the end of the day, if these minerals are being, utilised everywhere, maybe it might be even environmentally more, useful to have a more regional use of minerals rather than on a county-wide basis. But I'm not sure if it's a legal requirement on our part to do a county one, but it seems, from my point of view, it seems a bit pointless to be quite frank about it. But my other point still stands, Chair, about if we are going to update it, even if we do our own, it might be easier to link it into another plan because the timing doesn't sync up from my point of view. Thanks, Chair.
No, I mean, thank you, Councillor, and certainly to do a from the ground up complete minerals plan would be quite a large piece of work. But I wonder if Mark would like to respond on the questions raised by Councillor North and earlier by Councillor Jenny. Again, sticking to minerals for the moment, but don't worry, Councillor Lee, you are not forgotten. But let's sort of try and keep these slightly separated out at the moment. What's your thoughts about incorporating a minerals plan into our strategic plan, or taking Councillor North's left field argument and seeing whether it could become part of a wider regional plan? I don't know what you might think about that.
Thank you, Chairman.
No pressure.
On the second one, actually, the issue of actually having sort of wider plans. For a start, every minerals and waste planning authority has to do a minerals and waste local plan, or has to have those policies, and there's no exception to that. Now, how you go about that, is you can do your own plan, or you can do it as part of a joint plan with one or more other authorities. So there is, you could argue that there are actually benefits in having a plan that covers more than say two local planning authorities, i.e. it would go outside Northamptonshire. But I think the area that you choose has to be a relatively coherent one for it to sort of work well. The way the system for sort of disseminating minerals information is undertaken in this country is still on a regional basis. It's through a network of what are called aggregates working parties, and it so happens that Northamptonshire is the secretariat for the East Midlands. We were appointed to that role by the Department of Levelling Up and Housing and Communities, and the job of the aggregates working parties is to ensure that there's a sort of there's no real issues of supply and demand across the county. Now, one of the problems is they don't have, you know, that much teeth compared to what they used to do, where they used to basically sort of take national figures, give a regional figure, and then apportion it down to the individual minerals and waste local planning authorities, who then had to stick with that figure. Now it's all a bit more sort of, you know, loose, with the big drivers being, you know, what did you extract over the last 10 years, and are there any sort of adjustments that need to be made as to future provision, with a particular look at what's happened in the last few years. And that's more now the basis for how you put those, how you sort of create your provision figure within plans, and that will still be the case. You know, if you sort of move forward with a joint plan, you'd still have to be alive to what is in the individual parts of the authorities that make it up. But again, it does give you a bit more of an opportunity to look at things at a wider scale, and to see whether or not you could make more strategic shifts that you wouldn't be able to do if you were just doing with your own plan. Now, I think in relation to joint plans that North Northamptonshire could get involved with, you're either looking north into the rest of the East Midlands, and I just get that feeling that, you know, they're sort of quite big suppliers on their own, you know, in their own right. They're still, you know, there's still a lot of extraction going on there, that I have a feeling that it wouldn't perhaps be more appropriate to go that way. However, going south, and possibly linking up with the Bedfordshire unitary authorities and Milton Keynes, was a sort of slightly sort of Oxcam Arc sort of central area, sort of a joint minerals and waste local plan, that could actually potentially be quite beneficial. Although obviously, you know, the more people are involved, the more local authorities, the more you need to ensure that everyone has buy-in for the various stages that, you know, that need to be approved. Because what you wouldn't go down the route of is probably a joint board. You'd need still to have the individual authorities signing off the plan. Now, I've had one sort of chat with a colleague to the south, and I get the feeling that, you know, that a larger joint plan, you know, wouldn't be out, you know, isn't one of those things that would be just sort of discounted. That there could be some serious thought given to whether or not it would be more beneficial. But again, once you start to do that, you sort of, it sort of takes time to set up, and therefore, you know, you're sort of going a bit out of your comfort zone, and therefore you'd be, I think, naturally looking then for a comprehensive review, rather than a number of sort of, you know, quick sort of, you know, mini reviews amongst, you know, the authorities, if you see what I mean. You know, if you're going to say get 5 unitary authorities together, I think it's then very hard for you to sort of basically move forward with, you know, the separate ones all just sort of sewn together. You'd have to look at a more sort of greater review, and therefore that would take longer time, and potentially could be pricier. But I'm not sure about that.
Okay, well, thank you. And clearly, I mean, I don't know if there's any statutory duty to cooperate, or any, as there is with a lot of local planning policy, and certainly regional cooperation is something that it's interesting with a secretariat for it. So you know, there are some advantages, but you've answered the question in the sense that every local planning authority, or every local authority, has to have a minerals and waste plan, whether or not it's done in conjunction with other authorities. Councillor North, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, Chair, briefly, and I'm pretty sure you probably want to move on, but I mean, I have found this very interesting, and thanks again, Mike, for the comments, and I'm picking up on your comments. I mean, from my point of view, you know, what I said earlier is interesting. I think it would be worth exploring again from my point of view, Chair. You know, as we're still involved with the ARC, I think this is possibly an opportunity, depending which way we go in relation to, you know, doing right from the start in relation to, you know, separate plan from the West. But you know, thinking about it, Chair, I think, you know, if we're a transformational brand new unitary authority, perhaps it is worth exploring at least the opportunity of linking in with the ARC area and actually looking at it from a regional point of view, and actually, you know, delivering on the climate change as well, and actually just improving things and doing something different. And if it can be classed as doing our own plan still, deliver, but in conjunction with, you know, the ARC and the wider house building agenda for the southern region, and picking on Mike's points about possibly linking in Bedford, which of course, you know, is back to the growth and the, you know, and all that, then maybe we can think outside the box, Chair, but not too far outside the box, and it might be worth exploring. But of course, you know, entirely down to yourself. But I think it's worth exploring anyway.
Well, I think it's certainly worth having a discussion and engaging the interest of other authorities as well, because obviously without their interest and without their buy-in, obviously that, you know, it wouldn't really have very many legs. But it could be in everybody's mutual interest, while you do have to produce your own plan, to do so with a sort of, I don't know, almost an enhanced duty to cooperate, you know, a duty to sort of work together as far as is practicable while maintaining your own natural structure and plan. Anyway, hands going up again. Councillor Jenny, please. Then Mr. Harbour.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand where these locations could be and the geology that goes with them. Now, I understand that up in this area that we've got sand overlying aggregate, and therefore that these quarries tend to deal with the whole procedure, which is fine. Mark, I think you were referring, when you were sort of talking about going down Milton Keynes and into Bedfordshire. Well, Milton Keynes is clay, so I'm not seeing any aggregate. Well, having worked in Milton Keynes for God knows how many years, I've never come across any aggregate there in the slightest. When we get down to sort of Leighton and Linslade, then I think it tends just to be sand. So I'm wondering where Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes, etc., are going to find aggregates from.
Isn't it the upper? Isn't it the upper Great Ouse area, sort of Stony Stratford and?
No, because all of that is classed as Milton Keynes clay. There's nothing up there at the moment. Okay. To my knowledge, anyway.
I think Mark referred to some extraction possibilities in the Stony Stratford area.
Maybe getting over towards Buckingham is possible, but I don't think in Milton Keynes.
Anyway, Mark.
The Great Ouse does actually provide, you know, an element of River Valley sand and gravel. I mean, we've worked in the past with Milton Keynes Council. Again, I think some of the nice easy sites, the ones around Wolverton, have now been extracted from. Yeah. But there is still the opportunities sort of further up. I think Tytheringham is it, and not far from Stoke Goldington. There is some resources, and the industry has shown some interest in those in the past. But you're also right that there's also opportunities towards Buckingham, and I think, you know, again, once you get into Bedford, borough, it's still predominantly the Great Ouse that would provide opportunities. Although at the moment I don't know much about what's happening in Bedfordshire, and whether or not the opportunities there are actually sort of shrinking, or whether or not there's still opportunities for sort of decent amounts of extraction there.
But anyway, that's a technical matter. Either there is a resource or there is not a resource, and we can take that offline a little bit. Mr. Rob Harbour, you'd like to come in, sir? Good morning.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everybody. It's a very interesting discussion, I think, and I think what Mark has exposed is that there may potentially be several different options in terms of how we might proceed with a minerals and waste plan. I guess to some extent what strikes me here is that we probably need some kind of options appraisal in terms of what those options might be, and actually the kind of pros and cons attached to each. However, I'm also very mindful of the fact that we are talking about other local authority areas and their own statutory responsibilities. And I think if there is any opportunity to work with other local authorities, we firstly need to, I think, to gauge their appetite for joint working and a joint plan, because I think that there is a potential danger in coming back with an options appraisal without having first liaised and spoken to them and discussed whether it's something they may be interested with. Otherwise, I fear from past experience of having plans presented to me, which appear to be a fait accompli and which I've had no involvement in, it does tend to get people offside, and so I think there probably is just a little bit of procedure here in terms of how we go about a process of establishing what options are realistic and what might not. I think one of the significant benefits that we do have with Mark and the Minerals and Waste Planning Service is that they have a large amount of experience in terms of not only our own Northants county-wide minerals and waste plan, but in terms of work that they have done developing and delivering plans for other areas as well. So they are well connected. They are very experienced in working outside of Northamptonshire in terms of delivering plans. And as Mark spoke about earlier on, they also hold the role of secretariat as well for a wider area. So I think there's a lot of experience there of working across wider areas, and that's certainly a real positive and to our benefit. But I suppose what I would suggest, Chair, is that maybe there might be several conversations to have if we were thinking about these wider options, both in terms of technical conversations at an officer level, but also at a member level as well, to establish whether or not there would be a political appetite for joint working. And I think it's probably only on the basis of those discussions that we then ought to be thinking about bringing back some kind of options paper with those authorities that might be interested in being involved in a wider piece of work. And indeed, it may well be that options paper says it's not the right thing to do, and that actually we need a county-wide plan, or we need a Northants specific plan, or it could be something more sort of sub-regional. But that would be my suggestion, Chair, is that we first take some soundings, and then, dependent upon the outcome of that, then think about an options paper.
Well, I'm certainly happy to take soundings at a member level, and that members of this advisory panel, of course, will have their views, which I'm sure well, few members of this panel are shy about coming forward, so we'll have some very good feedback here. But also, if you would like Mark and Rob and George to have a discussion about the various options and the ways that might go forward, and then we might, you know, as we decide what we want to do, we can then start taking some informal soundings outside the borders of Northamptonshire. So could be useful. I see Councillor Barbara Jenny's hand up.
Yes, thank you. It seems sensible to explore options if we can. Just for my own gratification, and I'm sorry, I'm fairly new to this if I'm on the bus behind, but can you just tell me why sort of Northamptonshire lost favour in terms of mineral extraction? We obviously led the way at one point, but then are no longer at the top of the tree. So I was wondering whether that was quality or our ability to supply, or whether there's some other reason.
I think some of it's to do with sites being worked out, but Mark will probably have a better view than I do.
Yeah, I think it's two main reasons. Firstly, it's as you say, the decent sites have largely been worked out, so there's less opportunities. And secondly, over the same period of time, the industry has consolidated more and more, and it's now effectively sort of multinationals that make a lot of the big decisions, and the sites that are in Northamptonshire are no longer of particular interest to them. It's also if you've got none of the big guns operating at the moment, but I would imagine that once their sites are extracted from, we may not see much of them in the future. So those are the sort of two things. I think it's changes in the structure of the industry that have made the county less attractive, but also the resources availability that have made the county less of a place to invest in.
Okay, thank you, Mark. While you're on, Mark, and I see no other hands up, we've had quite an interesting discussion about the strategic way that we work the minerals part of a minerals and waste plan. But Councillor Lee mentioned it earlier. I wonder if you just want to touch on your thoughts on the waste part and what we should be doing, and any particular ideas that you might have, especially regarding how we dispose of our waste, and whether whether it's recycled, or to what extent it's recycled, and where we are, because obviously it's an integral part of the minerals and waste plan, and it's important to discuss that in the light of having a waste policy as well as the minerals.
Yes, thank you. Any plan that covers waste needs to have the relevant evidence base to back up what needs to be provided for, and that's done in every instance through a waste needs assessment, which basically looks at the opportunities, the sort of national trends in relation to sort of waste management and disposal, looks at potential population growth, and comes up with a sort of basically a sort of table that says what sort of where the gaps are in relation to certain types of waste. Now that includes municipal waste, but of course municipal waste is only about 11% of the total waste generated. There's construction and demolition waste, there's commercial and industrial waste, and all of that needs to be sort of fed through to sort of work out very roughly what the capacity gap is within the plan area. And once you know what that capacity gap is, then you can make the sort of then you can sort of make the policies and perhaps decide, you know, whether or not.
It's frozen. Okay, Mark. Okay, he really has frozen.
So
Mark,
is that when
Mark, sorry to interrupt you, but you actually froze for a few moments. So if you could just go back a moment.
yeah. Okay. Yes. So you look at the various sort of threads of waste, and then you work out, you know, what is required, and that becomes the sort of capacity gap that you need to fill. You know, whether that is through specifically identified allocations, or whether it's through development management policies, and there's no fixed way forward, and it often.
Yeah. There's no fixed ways forward, but often something happens. Mark, you've frozen up again.
It's a shame because it's so interesting.
Yeah, it's annoying.
Yeah, he knows a lot about it.
I think he's turned his video off. So, well, he has turned his video off. Mark, can you hear us? Over. Okay. Well, I know Councillor Jenny and Councillor North want to come in. We have lost Mark, which is actually particularly annoying because he's the expert in this. I'm going to give it a couple of moments, and then I think, with your permission, what we will do is we will turn to the Kettering Hospital LDO paper and have a look at that while Mark has a chance to re-establish communications. I'm just checking whether he's dropped off completely. He might come back on if that's the case.
I think he's dropped off completely, actually, Chair. So,
right, in that case, I'm sorry, because that was an interesting discussion. Oh, hang on, I think he's back. Mark, is that you,
yes,
sir?
Yes.
Welcome back.
Managed to throw me out totally then.
No, you disappeared totally. Bad business. Right, can you remember where you were?
Yes, it was the sort of capacity gaps and whether or not you do allocations or development management policies or a mix. And you know, what the plan identifies is those gaps to meet. Now, I mean, historically, or you know, the last few plans that we've done in Northamptonshire have identified the more advanced treatment facilities, your sort of energy from waste and the like, as being the areas where more capacity is needed, as well as more disposal capacity. Now, that's one of the problems with doing a sort of what is, I suppose, a very sort of technical piece of work of a waste needs assessment, that it might not necessarily be exactly how things are on the ground. And one of the first things is that I don't think the need is there for disposal, so I don't expect in any circumstances we'd perhaps need to find more disposal capacity, because you know, that's shrinking across the country, and more and more of that is being sort of moved around. So it's not like the old days where everyone needed to have at least some disposal capacity. And the other one relates to advanced treatment facilities. Now, technically speaking, in Northamptonshire, we've still got a gap that needs to be met, and that's despite facilities being granted in the north of Daventry area, which is now operational, and 2 facilities in Corby, neither of which are operational, but both have a large amount of capacity there. Again, it's because the waste industry, I think, struggles to get the finance to construct a number of these facilities, so that even if you get a permission, there's no guarantee that it will be built, and often the permission is then sold onto someone else who then seeks to sort of want to make tweaks to it. So so at the moment it's hard to say sort of long term what some of the needs are. You can put it in a waste needs assessment, and we have to do that. We have to get that through the inspector. But what then happens in the real world is often not quite exactly what the waste needs assessment says.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Councillor Jenny, please. David, Jenny.
Thanks, David. Yeah. Having read the County Council's plan and listened to numerous ex-county councillors, there's a feeling that there is a weakness in the location of some of these plants, in that they seem to be being located in close proximity to housing areas. I can think of two particular problems at the moment. There's just been a major planning application for a site in Corby, which is very, very close to housing. And in Rushden, there is a problem with the Monoworld site, and we've had that for several years now. But it was originally granted permission as a B8 building, and then was able to change its designated use to waste, and has caused significant aggravation for the residents that live. God, I'm sorry to use the word resident, I'm starting to sound like another councillor, but they've caused immense problems. So when we get round to writing whatever we write, I would urge us to make sure that we keep all of these things away from residential areas.
As far as possible.
As far as possible, yes.
I mean, it's interesting because I remember on the strategic planning committee some time ago, they actually approved construction of a building in the site in Rushden to which you refer, which should help to mitigate some of the problems that you identify. But obviously, it doesn't always make good neighbours, and you make a valuable point. But of course, identification of sites is also a tricky one.
Yeah.
But anyway, Councillor North, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've always been a fan of energy from waste, which I think you know, and I mean, as Councillor Jenny just said, I think it depends where you put them.
Yeah.
If you're on about municipal waste, and I think with obviously all the media and all that's going to happen about energy, fuel prices and gas prices, April, if we've got different forms of delivering energy from waste, then from my personal point of view, that'd be great and welcome. And we've got plenty of opportunity again, new council in the future. But I share the point that in the past, as a county municipal waste, I don't think we've got enough capacity to barely warrant a plant on our own. So if we're talking about municipal waste, I'm sure, if we ever went down that route, Chair, strategy-wise, I'm pretty certain, it being, again, in collaboration with others. The bit I'm interested about is Mark's point about the lack of need for capacity on the wider front in relation to commercial and other waste. I think, once again, if we're talking about obviously in relation to delivery of growth, economy-wise and housing-wise, and all the waste that creates as well. I'm not on about municipal waste. I'm on about all the other types of waste. Then, and I know I mentioned it in the last conversation, but once again, we're back to the ARC, and we're back to, a wider conversation, in my view, about the amount of waste that will generate in relation to the delivery of growth. I think we talk a lot about economic growth opportunities on an ARC basis and on a regional basis, in relation to the growth, the housing numbers needed. But we don't often talk about, which I don't see discussed very often, of course, is actually the waste that's created from all that growth, and again, where to put it. So I'm interested in Mark's point that, county-wise, I think I pick his words right, that there wasn't a need, or there isn't a need for a great deal more capacity in relation to self-contained waste. What I'm more interested, Chair, is if we're taking on the view that actually with all the growth we've got to deliver, and hopefully the improvements to the economic growth of the country, are we taking in the waste on, an ARC point of view? Again, I know I'm being, wider this morning than North-Northants, but we are part of the, the wider ARC agenda. And again, I think, we've got an opportunity, if we've got to do these, revamp these policies, of taking that on board. Thanks, Chair.
Well, I think that's a useful point, because obviously if we're going to be looking beyond, we're looking at the options, exploring the options beyond our borders in terms of the minerals extraction plan, it could well be part of the same work, especially as we are projected to have the growth that we're going to be having as part of the ARC project and other projects too. It's not just the ARC. Which will obviously naturally generate more waste. So we need to, it all comes into that funny term infrastructure, which is bandied around occasionally, although not very often at some quarters. We do need to have the ability to sort out, to dispose of waste that is generated, both by housing, but also by employment and other areas of the economy. And it might be wise to look beyond our borders. I don't know if Mark wants to come back on that quickly.
Yeah, well, I think, if you do a sort of joint minerals local plan, then I think there's a lot of advantages in in bringing waste into it. So you've got the two sort of what's known as the sort of county planning, minerals and waste planning authority responsibilities in one plan. It's not quite. One of the reasons why minerals and waste was often seen as being intrinsically linked, and why you did have local plans, was the under old circumstances. You dug the minerals up and then you put the waste back in the hole that you dug the minerals up from. And it's it's not quite like that now, but there is still a sort of a decently close relationship between extraction and minerals and waste. So yes, I think if you're going to do joint planning work on minerals, then I think it would be appropriate for that to be done for waste as well.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Just before we dispose of this topic, because I think we've had a really good discussion actually, I wonder if Councillor Lee wants to come back. Are you reassured by some of what's been said?
Yes, I am. This is really interesting. I'm sure we'll have further discussions on the other panel on for climate change, environment and growth. Thank you very much, Chair.
No, thank you, and thank you for raising it, because I do think we've got to always look outside the box, as Councillor North observed earlier, and where we can work together. And I know it's not always possible. Where we can, we've got a shared problem in a way, but we've also got could share solutions. So it is quite valuable. So unless anybody wants to come in on that, I think I'm going to thank Mark very much indeed for his wisdom and his contributions on this. It's been a really good discussion. And if I don't see any hands flying up, I'm going to move now to the next item in the agenda, which is a little update on the, indeed more than an update, on the Kettering General Hospital local development order. And I'll ask Simon Richardson, if I may, to introduce the report. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction on the little local development order. What I will do is I'll take members through the report. It is I think quite detailed but quite compact. And I'll try and focus in on those areas that I think of particular relevance and worthy of further discussion. So, members, the purpose of this report is to seek feedback on the draft local development order for Kettering General Hospital before it's provided for wider consultation. I'll take then from the executive summary. So Kettering General Hospital was announced as one of the hospitals considered for significant investment in 2019. Development will involve a large number of both minor and major works. I don't think, from what I've seen, we can underestimate the numbers of individual pieces of work or applications that are likely to come forward. The development could, in effect, extend to 8 to 10 years of development on site. The local development orders provide permitted development rights for specified types of development in specified locations, and that's exactly the case in this instance. Then I'm turning to paragraph 2.5. The local development order has the potential of providing a significant long-term benefit in the delivery of this major scheme. The LDO allows less contentious development in defined areas, can be managed more effectively without the need for the submission of planning applications. Development outside of the specific locations or the conditions that are set within the local development order will still require the submission of planning applications in the normal way. So there's still very much that marker that if it doesn't fit within the LDO, planning application will be required in the normal way. So then we'll move onto it in more detail in a little while. The draft LDO is provided as Appendix A rather, and it's important for a full and thorough consultation to be undertaken with stakeholders and statutory agencies and neighbours on the draft LDO, and I think that's of significance. We're at an early stage, and we think we've got something that is worthy of consideration, and we'll be putting it out there to test it. Then I shall turn to the draft local development order itself. So looking in the first instance at the introduction, the purpose of the LDO is to increase certainty and provide flexibility for the hospital trust relating to the proposed major redevelopment of its site. The local development order will permit development that will be acceptable in planning terms to simplify the process of granting planning consent where appropriate and accelerate delivery. This LDO will be subject to a thorough and transparent consultation. Turning now to the background to the hospital site. The site is accessed via Rothwell Road on its northern boundary, and there's a mix of residential properties and commercial units beyond that boundary. On the eastern side is the Midland Main Line, and residential streets and properties to the south and west of the hospital boundary. And then you'll see on page 3 of the document, page 17 of the agenda, there's a photograph there, an aerial photograph looking at the site, and you get a feel. Rothwell Road, for indication, is the road that travels northeast direction. So that's the access point. Then turning to the details of the LDO, perhaps the zones within the hospital site on page 5 of the LDO document, page 19 of the agenda. It may also be with that, bearing in mind that there's a plan at page 23, and that provides the zones graphically. So the hospital site has been identified in 3 zones. Zone A is the central part of the site and has a minimum of 50-metre distance from the site boundary. And I think it's fair to say that's the less sensitive area because of its proximity within the built form of the hospital. Then there's Zone B, which is an area on the eastern edge of the site where there are less sensitive receptors. So that runs alongside the railway line. There is a small conservation or pocket park area there, but it doesn't run the risk of concern over its proximity to residential properties. Then Zone C is the remainder of the area of land that forms the 50-metre buffer to the boundary, marked at 10-metre bands. So then looking at the conditions there. So firstly, if the proposals fall within that described below zones A, B and C, and within the zones identified, then the specified development would not require a planning application. So within zone A, you'll recall that's the central area of the development. And the information is there for you to read. I won't read it verbatim, but that relates to buildings and structures and or plant for demolition. So that's number 1. Then number 2 is new buildings, structures and or plant, and applications will not be required for buildings including walkways and covered links that are lower than 20 metres, so that's excluding the plant. So that's the parameters for development within Zone A that would not be subject to planning application. So then moving on to that within Zone B. So in the first instance, it's buildings, structures and or plant for demolition. Second element is any new chimney, and that would be lower in height than the existing chimney, and that would not require planning application. And then thirdly, new buildings, structures and or plant, applications will not be required for buildings excluding plant, including walkways and covered links that are lower than 15 metres in height. So the first instance 20 metres, second 15 metres. And then looking next at development within Zone C. So this is the most sensitive due to its proximity to residential properties. And again, it's buildings and structures and on plant for demolition under 1. And then under 2, all proposed buildings within this zone which are 10 metres or lower, excluding the plant. So that's reducing in height as we've gone through those increasing sensitivities. The next element looks at all zones, and there's some notes there. Construction of non-adopted roads, paths and footways, car parking areas and associated infrastructure above and below ground would not require a planning application. And then there's some notes, some further notes there for clarity. And turning the page, one element of the requirements of a local development order is to set out the statement of reasons. So main reasons relate to the LDO site boundaries, is the full extent of the Kettering General Hospital as outlined on the plan. It's a description of the development allowed. It's contained under the headings, the zones I've just highlighted within the hospital site. Third bullet is a mechanism through which less contentious development can be managed more effectively as a part of the overall master planning and redevelopment package. Fourth bullet point is a way for the council to support delivery of a significant redevelopment package, supporting another provider within the area, and provides certainty to the hospital trust and reduces the risk of delay and the implications of that delay in terms of securing funding, but also enabling delivery and the continued provision of that very important service at the hospital site. Then turning the page again, the last element I'll cover is setting out the process. We've identified quite a tight process. We'll seek to adhere to that. But if agreed, we'll be looking to go out for a 4-week public consultation during February. We'll return with the results of that consultation and any consideration over changes to the local development order to a meeting of this panel on the 17th of March. The pathway then takes us to a strategic planning committee, where the members of that committee will have an opportunity to approve the local development order in the same way as it would a planning application. And then there's a requirement on the authority to notify the Secretary of State of the new local development order. That largely is around providing the Secretary of State with the opportunity to intervene if it's felt appropriate to do so. So, Chair, before we move on to any recommendation, I'm happy to take any questions and open the discussion up for you.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. And the LDO is a masterpiece of brevity. You know, I've never seen such a slim document in planning policy in my life. It's remarkable. But it does seem to make good sense. It does seem, to my innocent eyes, to be a reasonably straightforward document, and it has taken into consideration the residential nature of the surrounds of the site. And of course, the lengthy game of Tetris that will have to be played, so when various buildings are taken out and new ones put back in. So very much look forward to the discussion. And I also very think that the bullet point, the last bullet point on the statement of reasons, is really the raison d'etre, really, is it not? It provides certainty to the hospital trust and its ability to deliver development at the site and reduce the risk of delay. So looks on the face of it excellent. I also very much welcome the consultation and the feedback to this panel and to the Strategic Planning Committee in due course. Anyway, a forest of hands has shot up, as you would expect, and the first is Councillor North, please.
Thank you, Chair, and it's you've mentioned it yourself, and Mr. Richardson has mentioned as well the Strategic Planning Committee. So I'm obviously keeping an open mind as I chair that committee, and it's due to come for that for approval or not in April. So obviously anything I say today, I shall be listening with intent, but still not predetermining or making a review. So just keeping an open mind on that. But I've got a couple of queries in relation to the planning policy rather than planning management side of it. So I'll try my best to stay on that front. I'm all in favour of LDOs, and I think we've done them all doing them before, certainly from an East Northants point of view. But from a process point of view, I mean, obviously it's a huge development from a planning policy point of view, and appreciate all the issues we're looking at, trying to keep a live hospital running, but basically doing a complete redevelopment. But obviously this is planning policy, and I'm just keen, I suppose, Chair, to feed in on how, I suppose, from an updates point of view in relation to maybe the Kettering local plan or a new strategic plan or any of the other documents we need to do from a planning policy point of view, Chair, within, you know, the cycle of Northants, on how, on that LDO, how that fits into our strategic plans, and how, I suppose, how you or we're updated on how that's all working through. I appreciate the caveats in there about, you know, the breaches and requiring planning permission and so forth, but I'm obviously more interested in kind of the reporting maybe to officers or members, or just how we keep it all in train within the current or in the constraints of what we're trying to do in relation to current policies and new policies. So I suppose how it all fits in, that'd be useful. And the other thing, Chair, which is a concern, a major concern from my point of view, but again, keeping my obviously, mind open to, the response and what may come forward from residents in relation to the consultation is the zone plans, the zoning for C. In planning policy context, I am concerned, but also in the planning management context, I think it is a constrained site. Obviously, the trust wanted to stay within that site, but my concern is in relation to Zone C, because I mean, if you look at the current plan, the page 9 plan, and in linking in with the photo on page 3, I think Mr. Richardson absolutely said that there are some sensitivity around this, not the Rothwell Road side or the inbuilt side or the railway line side, but the greater areas of C. Now you'll see, Chair, from some of that, there is a good 40-metre buffer in relation to the housing. Now, obviously, if and when we approve this LDO, quite a considerable development can take place now to a 10-metre buffer. And I think, from a planning policy point of view, because I have to be careful which committee or which meeting we're in today, but I just wonder if, how we got any views of protecting, what, there's been quite a considerable amount of green space for those residents on that site. And in relation to balancing what is obviously a new build, basically, on a very constrained site, and how we move from a kind of 40-50 metre buffer on part of this site to a 10-metre buffer, and how, we link into planning policy of, how we link it in with planning policy, because I'm careful not to raise concerns from a planning management point of view. So I'm sorry if that was a bit long-winded, Chair, but I'm just interested in how we're linking now kind of planning policies around, certainly protecting green space on the site, because from my point of view, it does look like we're losing basically all the green space on the site completely, which can't be overly great from a planning policy point of view. But just a couple of quizzes from my point of view to start with.
Sorry, as I understand it, you're asking two questions. One is actually how the LDO fits into the planning policy matrix.
Yep.
And secondly, and looking at the photograph at page 17, there is a good chunk of green space to the west and to the southwest, assuming the photograph looks north. I'm not sure that isn't north, that's what it's anyway. It is to the south of the site, north to the right of the photograph. But there is this sort of swathe of green space around the left-hand side of the photograph, and a bit to the bottom of the photograph, and presumably that's what you're talking about.
It is, Chair, and I'm careful about its planning policy, not planning management, but there must be some issues around green space and protecting the residents from a policy point of view, where we possibly could be moving from, a good 50-metre buffer on that part to 10 metres and still actually building within that 10 metres. So, as I said, we're basically squeezing in a new hospital on an old site, and I'm just interested on the planning policy point of from this meeting anyway.
Okay, thank you. Simon, did you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent.
So,
thank you.
On the first point with regards to the local development order itself, funny enough, we're getting the same inquiries from the representatives of the hospital. Does the redevelopment package need to feature as a part of the new strategic plan and the likes? And I've still to come back to the trust on that. My initial thinking is it's an established site. It has a recognised use attached to it. It's whether we place greater emphasis on the significance of that site as a facility and the support it requires to ensure that its significance overall perhaps is recognised as to how it contributes to the area in terms of the services that it provides. The LDO itself, it would be in effect permission. So any details, any proposals that fall within those zones and meet the criteria would automatically be granted planning permission. So it steps aside that, and I suppose that then comes on to your next point. Is the significance of getting it right, because we could arguably be accused of planning those areas blind unless we look into them in the depth that we're required to, and that the different zones, and it's part of the discussions, the lengthy discussions we've had with the hospital trust, is that the activity within the hospital, because of the scale of the development proposed that would fit within the LDO, there will be significant numbers of applications for much larger scale development that will absorb, in effect, the smaller development, and so that small element is barely noticed within the larger development package. But rightly so, as we bleed out towards the boundaries, and particularly towards the residential elements, that then starts to have that greater impact. I think then it's the decision of the hospital. It currently does have, it's a compact site and it does have some green space, but the green space isn't of particular environmental quality. It does provide a more open environment, but it's important to recognise that a decision has been made to maintain the hospital within its current site, where we have a growing population with growing health needs. So there's a tipping balance, I think, to be had there in terms of the value of retaining that green space against allowing for the expansion of development. It's then, though, whether that balance tips as to the harm that can be caused to the residential amenity of those residential properties that immediately abut. And that, I think, is where the focus of our consultation and further analysis will be. Our initial findings are we feel that we have the conditions and the measurements from the boundary right, but we're open to explore at greater depth with not just the residents within the area, but also with these statutory undertakers and their thoughts and views on whether that balance is tipped right or not. And that's why we're so keen to ensure that we go to depth on the consultation. I do have a colleague on the call with me, so Richard Marlowe, I'm priming you. But Richard has significant experience in dealing with a number of the applications in the grounds of the hospital. So he's been party to ongoing discussions on the local development order, and he's also been involved in recent times, especially in terms of the new development activities, particularly in relation to the COVID solutions. So I'm asking Richard whether he has anything additional to add to the points I've already highlighted.
Thank you, Simon.
Morning,
apologies,
Richard.
Chair.
Welcome.
I don't have video at the moment. I seem to have some technicalities. Yeah, it's probably just useful just to come in on a couple of matters. Thank you, Simon. Obviously, I think the key one is about that relationship to the residential properties. And I think that'll be one of the key areas of contention through that consultation process. I was having a look this morning at some of the sizes existing on the site, just to give a sort of an idea or an on the ground reality to what some of the dimensions were. The main block of the hospital, where the main entrance is, the 5-storey building that has a sort of rooftop plant area as well. That's in the region of 22.5 metres tall, just to get some sizing. To the rear of that, the south of the site, the foundation wing, which is the white building with a sort of very colourful entrance, which houses the children's ward and the intensive care unit built about 10 years ago. That at its highest point is just under 15 metres, and that's a 3-storey building, sort of as the hospital see it. Then the sort of southeastern side, it's shown on that photograph on page 17. It's a beige building, blue beige building, sort of to the left-hand side of that photograph is the treatment centre, which sits on that eastern side, near to the Western Power Distribution area, and then the Midland Main Line beyond. That again, 3-storey building, and I just looked at that. That's just over 14 metres in height. So yes, I'm sure there will be some comments about those heights, particularly those ones in close proximity of residential properties, and it'll obviously be those elements that we'll be looking to consider and come to review after that consultation process is taken place. On a similar matter, which Simon covered in the report, it's important probably to highlight that obviously over the last 18 months from April 2020 until December last year, hospitals and local authorities had a range of permitted development rights as a direct response to the COVID pandemic. For the hospital, this has allowed a number of works to be undertaken on site. So there's a temporary ward that's been created on what they call car park A. So that's the car park in the centre of the site nearest to the accident and emergency section. That was put in place very early on in the pandemic. And then about a year ago, there was a 2-storey modular ward, I think they call it Thomas Ward, placed adjacent to Rothwell Road at the north of the site, next to the old vehicular access to the site, which is only used now for emergency vehicles. And they were 2 examples of where, from the sort of local planning authority's point of view, they're relatively minor developments. They clearly allow the hospital to do what it needs to do during that pandemic phase. And it was for that reason that the government chose to temporarily allow permitted development rights for those sorts of initiatives. So it's based on that and that experience, which has in the round been positive. It's based on that we're looking for the local development order to build on that flexibility, but obviously set those parameters in place to provide some certainty for us as a local planning authority, but also give the hospital a degree of flexibility in how, as the chair's quite rightly mentioned, how those Tetris pieces are shuffled around the site over the sort of short to medium term, so that the more wide-scale development can come forward, but obviously most critically that the hospital's services aren't unduly interrupted. So we'll see obviously how that comes out through the consultation process, but yeah, we believe the sort of balance is there, and I think we're probably right to say that we have been quite proactive and pushed the envelope of what the LDO does, and quite rightly so, because we want to sort of help facilitate that wider regeneration of the site for the benefit of all the residents locally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for that very helpful clarification and explanation as to where we are with this. I think that's actually quite, that has actually answered 1 or 2 questions, I think. And, you know, certainly we are definitely in a very constrained site, and, you know, there are going to be advantages and disadvantages as the various aspects of the site are redeveloped. Anyway, a couple of questions. Councillor Jenny, please.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Simon. I really do approve of this. This takes me back to my Milton Keynes days. We've got a planning problem, we'll rewrite the rules. And it works. I've got 2 or 3 points that I suspect you've already thought about them, but they're not clear from the LDO itself. And Richard actually just confused my mind a little bit a moment ago, because he referred to buildings being 22.5 metres high, whereas the LDO is saying 20 metres. My question was going to be, bearing in mind that hospital wards tend to have a floor-to-floor height of somewhere about 4 metres, is a 5-storey building going to be enough for what they want to do? I mean, perhaps before we actually sign this off one way or the other, it could be helpful if we could have a look at some of the proposed drawings, and then we could understand a bit better what's going where. The second point, and again, I'm not absolutely certain, but it's to do with the boundary by the railway. What's likely to be going there? And just a word of caution that Midland Main Line are very precious about building anywhere quite close to their lines. They certainly won't want tower cranes swinging over. And we did some work a little bit further down the line about 7 or 8 years ago, and they got quite sniffy when we got within 15 metres. So I hope there isn't a problem there, but I'm just flagging it up as a possibility. And then the third thing on page 20, point 3 of your NB, the LDO will be effective for a period of 10 years or until rescinded by North Northamptonshire Council.
That's right.
I think we need to be very definite about it finishing. The words in there need to be very clear, because otherwise, I mean, this ain't going to be finished in 10 years. There's not kind of hell's chance of this being finished in 10 years. They all say, we've got a 10-year program, fine, but programs only go one way, and that's outwards. So it isn't going to be finished. And quite frankly, by the time you get to year 7, 8, or 9, some of the requirements will have changed and they'll want to do something different. So we need to have the right sort of words in there to cater for that.
As I understand it, the LDO is legally for 10 years. And obviously, if at the end of year 8 or 9, it is needed to be extended, then it would have to come back and be extended. It expires by itself after 10 years, as I understand it.
Well, I think that's what should happen, David. But bearing in mind, none of us are going to be around in 10 years' time to make sure that.
I don't know. Might be a few survivors. You never know, Dave.
Well, not if you go to that hospital, but never mind.
I was a bit nervous when Mr. Richardson was talking about statutory undertakers earlier, but anyway. Anyway, yes. However, I think that's the legal framework, but
yes,
it is something we need to consider. But I think also on your wider point, the consultation is going to be the key, and we all, we do need to make sure that it is it is distributed, that the consultation exists, and that the feedback is taken into consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, I presume Simon has picked up on the 2 points. Yeah.
He's nodding.
Yeah, thank you.
So just to finish that last element off, then, Chair, through you, the 10 years is a date anticipated that the works will finish. I think we do need to identify an end date, and I think anything sooner just adds that air of doubt and means that we're needing to go through it again. However, setting that unless the council determines to rescind it, gives us it just gives us that power and that control, and it flags to anybody else that is within our gift to rescind it if things don't play out in the way that, as we sit here today, we anticipate that they will. In terms of the height of buildings, anything else quite clear that anything that doesn't fit within the parameters, the conditions of the LDO, will simply just need to submit a planning application. That's without doubt, no confusion over that. We've thought about the ways that we go about ensuring that, and that can quite simply be through our general monitoring of the other activities that are going on there. If we see something that we're unsure on, we can make the necessary inquiries, and we can go about addressing it to ensure that it goes through the proper process, whether that is extracting it from the local development order mechanism or not. And then I take your point exactly on the Middle Main Line. We'll seek to ensure they'll be consulted as a part of the programme, and the trust have people on board at the moment designing that energy hub, so we can continue with those discussions to ensure that it's properly considered and doesn't fall too close to the boundary, and the not just the trains, I suppose, but it's also the electric lines and whether there's any implications as associated with that. So hopefully I've covered those points off. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Simon. That's reassuring. Right, Councillor Deering, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I quite welcome the LDO. However, I do have some major concerns over highways, because nothing is mentioned on highways here at all. And you know, it's bad enough as it is now getting in and out of that hospital, and it's bad enough for the ambulances to get in and out themselves. So I do have some concerns over where we stand on the highways element, if we're allowing them to build without any planning permission. What they, you know, not what they want, but they can build what they want to a degree. So I have some concerns over that. I'd like to also just sort of comment on Zone C, especially on the residential side, sort of the green area at the back. And that, again, I'm kind of with Councillor North on this thing. We've got to be very careful. A 10 metre back from the border, if you like. Certainly, I can see there are already several buildings that are sitting on that 10 metre and slightly less, actually. So you could say, well, that's a prerequisite for it. But I do think we need to be a little bit careful on what height is going to be built if it's 10 metres away from a border, or look at altering the border to make it maybe 20 metres backwards, just from when we're looking at the residential side of it. They're just general comments on it. So, and if I might also, down at the, I know it's going to be an energy part, down at the back end, the bottom end, we are suggesting, and it's kind of the opposite, to be honest, we are suggesting a height there for Zone B, which is actually less than the height that we are allowing in Zone A. I think it's 15 metres for Zone B and 20 metres for Zone A. And I have to say almost the opposite. I don't see why we can't allow them, if they want to go to 20 metres height in Zone B. It's just general comment.
Okay. I think, yeah, thank you. I think certainly the highways issue is always going to be a headache, because you know, the site is already causing quite a lot of traffic congestion from time to time, and once we're getting into a lot of construction works going on, that is going to add to the misery. And I don't know that there's much we can do about it, but I don't know if you wanted to comment, Simon.
Yes, I will, Chair. Thank you. So in terms of the height, I'm trying to separate not the height, the highways, trying to separate off the local development order from the rest of the package that's due to go ahead with the master planning of the hospital. So the hospital will be approaching the authority any day soon with a series of plans and comments on the overall phase 1 and phase 2 package, which is the 500 million spend. Highways will be a significant part of that, of course. The activities associated with the local development order will be very much a lesser element within that overall package, particularly as it relates to highways matters. So it won't get missed out, the highways issues. It's just that it won't be at the forefront of the local development order, but it will be one of the key character aspects that will need to be considered when the additional plans come in for phases 1 and 2. So it is to be considered within that. I think the point on Zone C, absolutely agree with you, and that's why we'll be looking to test it to the depth that we do. I'm wondering, sitting here now, whether there's something more that we can be doing around the plans. So the request to potentially have sight of the plans. Those plans are emerging all the time. So what I will be looking to do is speak with the trust to see if they can make some of that available to us, so that instead of it, so we can visualize the extent of the planned development within the master plan, and then start to recognize the true impacts or not on the residential properties in the area. It is something that we need to be very careful over. And then I take your point on Zone B and the heights there. I think the focus is the energy element, but I'll have a look at the details there to see whether, given that there isn't the potential residential impact there, whether there is something that we can do more to give a greater allowance for heights in that location.
Okay, thank you, Simon.
May I come back quickly?
Yes, of course you
can. Just to sort of get some confirmation from my point of view, is the master plan going to be passed before the LDO is passed, or is the LDO going to come in and they're able to do that sort of thing before the master plan? I'm assuming the master plan's got to be passed first.
Good question. The LDO is planned to be there to help to support a lot of the enabling works, which is the lower level early elements, so that the more major elements of development that will be looked at through the master plan phase 1, phase 2 aren't delayed in their own program. So the answer is no. The LDO we're looking to progress in the first instance, but it's helpful to progress it with the knowledge of the proposals as they emerge for phases 1 and 2.
Okay, so the LDO comes first, and it informs the master plan in the sense that you can actually you've got those permitted development rights as a master plan emerges.
That's right, and it means that when it comes to elements like seeking to locate, say, a new car park, they can go about relocating that new car park, moving the tetra places around, perhaps put a temporary ward on the site of the old car park, which means they are then able to demolish an existing ward to carry out works in line with phases 1 and 2, the element that needs planning permission.
So again, so I guess it's practicality coming up against correctness, in the sense that ideally, we're signing an LDO which almost is a blank check because we haven't got the detailed master plan, but equally they can't really do the detailed master plan without a lot of enabling works to take place in the first place.
In some ways, Chair, yes. It may well be that the master plan element is more advanced. So when it comes to making that decision, we could have that information available to agree that. A decision certainly won't be made on the applications for phase 1 or 2 at that point, but the clarity over the direction of travel certainly will be.
Okay, okay, I think I understand. Thank you. Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, I just want to express my support, my sympathy really for people who are planning this. I try to overlay the maps on the KGH Trust's website onto this our plan here. This is such a feat. It's going to be such a challenge to try for these medics who need to work in sterile conditions to work on a building site for up to 10 years or more. And but they are under a lot of pressure, especially because we don't seem to have planned any surgeries yet in Hunwood Park. The medical services will be under a lot of pressure, so this is badly needed. But I've got a lot of sympathy for the trust that is doing these works, and I hope that we can support them in any way we can. That's all I wanted to say, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor Lee. Indeed, I think we all agree with that. Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. More of a query again in relation to and how this works in relation to the order. It's quite a light document, and that's not criticism. But you know, if I was living on one of the surrounding roads round there, just wondered whether we can, or maybe we don't. Maybe that's not how these things work. But whether, you know, within the document that we're consulting on, the order itself, there are links to the just adopted Kettering local plan, or links to the master plan that we've just been talking about. So, you know, if you are a resident more locally and you're concerned about the impact, because I mean, there's obviously public consultation prior to being approved by a committee that we're accepting this order, which obviously is bypassing all planning, you know, rules that have just been adopted by in the Kettering area. You know, I'm just wondering whether there are kind of links in. And I suppose the other question for Simon is, I mean, does this bypass the recently adopted Kettering plan, or does it sit outside it in relation to that? Because, you know, there are, I'm sure, general concerns around the area of, you know, if these were individual developments that weren't through the LDO, even though things like parking and so forth sometimes aren't, you know, classed as part of the issues around planning permissions, there are all kinds of issues for local residents around this. So I think I suppose from a consultee point of view, which we're just about to do, I suppose I'm asking, you know, we've got everything covered, or helping the residents to make sure they can find the information within it. So I suppose there's, again, Chair, not being clear enough, but I suppose 3 points to it. Are we covering all the information in this? You know, does it link to the Kettering local plan, or does it bypass that? And the other point, Chair, is there's no other reference to the energy centre apart from one mention and the green mark on there saying that's the new energy hub or centre. And I just wondered, again, from a resident, even though it's kind of linking into the railway line area, whether actually there should be more information about exactly what that is. I know it'd be coming in the master plan, but if we're looking to, you know, giving this an LDO and actually being a great big you know, document to move forward on planning, but perhaps just should be a bit more detailed. But maybe that's just my personal opinion, and maybe it shouldn't. And in the master plan, but then that comes back to my first point: should there be links to other documents in the back? Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, well, it'd certainly be interesting to see how it links to the Kettering adopted Part 2 plan, because of course most of the discussion on the Kettering adopted Part 2 plan would presumably predated the advice that the investment was going to be made in the Kettering site. So I'm not sure how, because obviously the Kettering plan took some months with the Secretary of State before it came back. So I'm not perfectly sure what the timing was like, but it would be interesting to know where in the suite of planning policy documentation this LDO fits. Simon?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, you're absolutely right. It does. It sits outside of the Part 2 local plan. In part, I suppose the timing of the materials, one element, but then also I think the scale of development and the proposals is another element. If it's coming forward now, you'd perhaps look at it and say you're more likely to give it an emphasis in association with the strategic plan review than you would do the the part 2 in that respect. On the point of information availability, I think you're absolutely right there. I think it's helpful to build trust and be transparent in relation to the development that's proposed as it's emerging, and it's all the drawings and scales and so on are coming together at this moment in time to submit to the council for consideration. So if through discussions I can find a suitable mechanism that enables the detail or some of the detail or indicative information to be provided to the public so that they can best understand the designs and then best assess the implications or not on them, their residential amenity and their properties, then I think that's important. It may well be helpful in putting to rest in their own minds any concerns they have, rather than the opposite, alerting them to concerns. It's better to know. So if I can find through the trust the opportunity of providing that information and flagging it so that individuals and groups can inspect it in more detail, I will ensure that happens.
Well, thank you, Simon. Steve, Councillor North, has that put your mind slightly at ease? I see a thumb.
Yeah, I mean, as ever, Simon's very, very helpful on that. I mean, if I was, again, as I was putting myself as a local resident in that area, and if I was looking at this as an LDO, even if I didn't understand what an LDO was, you know, I kind of, and this again, this isn't a criticism, but I'd be kind of looking in the back for a link to the master plan, a link to the appendices, a link to it doesn't fall part of the Kettering local plan. Perhaps we should have said that. And again, the energy centre, but I think Simon says it. I mean, if he can find out more information from the trust of what that is or where that links in, fine. And it's not near a resi area, but it's opposite a resi area. So again, and I think, again, the more people are aware or we're aware in advance of this, Simon, you know, in my view, it puts off some of the quick questions that may come because the understanding is there, because the information is provided. And, you know, if this is an LDO that sits outside the local plan, then maybe if we can put a lot of appendices in the back, and these people can look things up and, you know, assure themselves, or they'll raise the questions when it comes, you know, part of the consultation. Thanks, Chair. Okay, thank you. And it'd probably be valuable to have a sort of database of people who respond to the consultation, because obviously they've shown an interest, and determine, you know, those of them who are residents who live near the site, so that they can be kept informed as the project develops. Anyway, Councillor Barbara Jenny, please.
Thank you. I think my question is an aside, as the master plan has been mentioned, and it's aimed probably at those working on the master plan, but will any provision be built in for helicopters to land at the site, which would prevent patients having to be airlifted to Coventry and possibly Leicester? I mean, we're building new buildings here, so if something could be built in that are within, you know, sort of capability of the constraints of this site, it might be a good idea to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, indeed, it's probably something we should. I mean, it's slightly without the terms of the LDO, but it's obviously something we could feed back through the consultation.
Certainly. So in answer, I'm not sure that I've seen any indication of a helicopter pad. Richard won't thank me again for this, but I'm going to ask Richard if he's seen any details on there. Richard Marlowe.
Thank you, Simon, for the opportunity. From local knowledge, I know years ago there was a helicopter pad on the green area that we were looking at earlier to the south of the site, so the area behind the foundation wing to the north of the properties on Windermere Road. I don't believe that's there anymore, and I don't know what the hospital zone arrangements are for helicopter access. But clearly, it'll be something that they've thought about.
It is actually an interesting point. Anyway, but it is something to feed back. So anybody who's intending to respond to the consultation, bear it in mind. Okay. Well, are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, thank you, Simon and Richard, for the presentation. And we have now got a recommendation at 3.1, that members of the planning policy of EAP consider and feedback, which I believe we've done, on the content of the draft local development order in advance of the proposed consultation with stakeholders and members of the public for a 4-week period. We have, I think, given some quite useful feedback, and I think, again, we've had a very good discussion. And at the recommendation, may we, well, I think I'm not even sure we need to take a vote on this really, but I suppose we better do, because it's correct to do so. So may I have a proposal that we can feed back for the draft, for the proposed consultation? Anybody propose?
Happy Chair, we can obviously try and get some appendices in there as we've discussed.
Yeah, thank you. Subject to obviously the discussion we've had today, but you're happy to propose that. Okay, thank you. And Councillor Deering, are you wanting to comment or second? You're muted, sir.
Just both very quickly for my chair. If anybody hasn't looked at the master plan on phase 1, looking at what they've got planned there, our concerns on the green aspect near the housing shouldn't be a concern looking at that at all. It's set well back. And yes, I'll second it. Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. That's helpful. And that's duly seconded. So is everybody in favour? Okay. If there is anybody against, please speak. And are there any abstentions? Also, please speak. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And that will now go forward as indicated for public consultation. Excellent. Okay, well, moving on to item 6 of the agenda, the executive forward plan. Quick report by Democratic Services. Louise, were you going to address this?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is the standing item that you have, which shows the executive's proposed decisions, which will take place over the next 3 months. And having a look at the plan, there are not anything that is specific to this committee at the moment.
No, indeed. So I think that's for noting. Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you again. Very thin agenda, fairly long meeting, but that seems to be the cross we all have to bear on this EAP. But it has been 2 really interesting discussions. And I'd like to thank members and officers for all their contributions and their wisdom and feedback. And so I do think these, panels are really valuable. They give an opportunity for the members with genuine expertise in a particular area to feed back to the council. So, well done, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for their time and trouble, and wish you all a very good afternoon. And now declare the meeting